technological innovations in terms of how we diagnose and detect diseases, everything from new DNA sequencing technologies to much, much better ways of analyzing remotely sensed images to statistical methods. So the tools have gotten much more sophisticated too. But I guess the paradigm shift has been the acceptance of ecosystem health as a discipline and the general acceptance by the public that there is a fundamental connection between ecology and health. That's something that was really non-standard. It went against the current.
I think it's clear from these comments that wildlife and ecosystem health have emerged as very important and reputable fields. But in each of my interviews, each person informed me that there are still a lot of issues that need immediate attention. Here's more.
The problem is it's a race. The more species that we lose, the more health problems that we endure, the more impetus we have to run around and rescue this person, deal with that resource depletion, war. Somebody's fighting over water, somebody else is fighting over oil, other people are fighting over rare minerals, somebody doesn't have enough lumber, food, the earth is degraded, food supply is not there, there's no food in the ocean. These things beget problems. If you don't have the native predatory species like birds, you get more mosquitoes, you get more mosquito-borne diseases. We don't need to do all that. But because species are getting in trouble and dropping out, we're losing the opportunity to get ahead of that bleak outcome. And so it's urgent. It's really urgent.
It would be tempting to say that the field of wildlife medicine or ecosystem health has really made a difference. I'm not sure. I think it has, but if you actually look back at the last few decades, what strikes you is just the number of serious wildlife disease problems that have emerged and have led to not very good consequences. So, some major examples are chytrid fungus in frogs, what's called species extinction. We're seeing other fungal diseases like white nose syndrome in bats, and facial disfiguration syndrome in snakes, which is emerging from. Tasmanian devil facial tumor disease, which is eliminated Tasmanian devils from a large part of their native range. West Nile virus, I could go on and on and on. There'd be suites of introduced emerging infectious diseases that have been serious for a long while. So I think that although we understand the problem better, what we're lacking are ways to address it and reverse it. So the research has certainly progressed, and we've learned a lot from the case examples that we've observed over the past few decades, but the idea of applying a medical philosophy to this problem, of intervening and preventing and even curing, has been much slower to come around. And partially that's because these problems are so complex that single-level interventions are probably not going to work. And when you try to intervene, you run against the same sorts of structural barriers that prevent intervention in many complex problems, which are politics and funding, implementation. So I think that the complexity of the problem has gotten worse, and the complexity of the world in which we live has gotten worse. And both of those things have really stymied our attempts to make a substantive difference.
I think the reductionism of science probably has driven a lot of the challenges. We develop specialties and then they subspecialize, and before you know it, everybody's talking a different language. And so everyone has, they're talking over in this corner and that corner, and no one is bringing all this stuff together synthetically to really solve the problems. People are just working in silos. And I think that's historically what has happened, and it's no fault. You can understand why it happened as knowledge became increasingly specialized, and there was plenty to do for one person just to work in this one little bailiwick. But after, it's just like geographical speciation and Darwinism, you separate the species geographically, and after a while, they can't breed. They couldn't pass, but Now their DNA is talking a different language and they can no longer come together and reproduce. And it's happened to us professionally and, in our scientific community, policymakers and that sort of thing. And that's the inherent problem, is the splitting up of all this knowledge. And no one bringing it back together to address the huge problems that exist in an accelerating way, really, as we're going forward with human expansion and industry and habitat invasion. So I think that's the root cause of the need for conservation to be sort of reborn, because of that splitting and breaking everything apart and then not forming a synthesis at the other end.
I think one of the really big challenges now is trying to assess the importance, the impacts on wild populations of sublethal infections, parasitisms, and intoxications, and particularly how they might interact. And it's really hard to do.
An enormous amount of information that comes in about wildlife disease. And simply keeping up is difficult. That's true of most of it. It's not a lot of information. So there have been some specific efforts to address that problem. For example, we have the Wildlife Disease Information Network here, which is attempting to, one of several efforts that's attempting to synthesize information that comes in from various sources to identify wildlife disease outbreaks and be a sort of surveillance and monitoring tool. We need that sort of synthesis of information to deal with the huge amount of information that's coming in. There is always the problem of funding. There are relatively decent funding prospects for zoonotic diseases because of their obvious implications for human health. But funding for wildlife diseases for the sake of wildlife diseases is very limited, even though those types of diseases can be sentinels or harbingers of things to come. So if we see clusters of wildlife disease outbreaks, we might concern not only the wildlife but also the people. Still, it's hard to convince agencies like the National Institute of Health that that sort of thing is important. So that paradigm is a little slow to change. But there are organizations that have stepped up to the plate. The Animal Foundation, for example, has specific wildlife and exotic grants that are trying to fill the gap. But the amount of funding that we have for wildlife disease research is not nearly commensurate with the scope of the problem.
I think one of my concerns, as we mentor students and they say, gee, I think I would like to do so-and-so. And, oh, that's a good idea, go do. And then you have to stop and think, how many students can you recommend that to, and how many jobs will there be? And I think that is a real tough call.
There aren't enough people doing the environmental contamination stuff, the eco endpoints, and the health endpoints all at the same time. People don't even know what's going on. That's the problem. People don't know we're in a sixth extinction.
Well, it's still, I think, an opportunity and a responsibility for all of these various disciplines to make it clear to the public how complicated these things are and how important it is for us to interact to get the job done, because no one aspect can do the whole thing. And for the public, I think in general, the public does not understand how complex some of these problems are and how necessary it is for these many disciplines to collaborate, interact, to address the problem.
client-patient veterinarian paradigm that supports small animal medicine or production animal medicine can't really be applied to wildlife and ecosystem health. So the question really is, what are wildlife worth and whom do they benefit? So I certainly believe that we all own wildlife, and society as a whole has an obligation and will benefit from ensuring the health of wildlife and paying attention to wildlife health in order to predict problems with our own health. So if that's the case, then the kind of nebulous answer is that society as a whole should step up. And I guess the institutions that we created to represent that should step up in the government. So there should be a broader recognition in some of the major government funding agencies for this type of work. And I think there is. There has been. So all of the major funding agencies, at least for research funding, USDA, NIH, NSF, and EPA, have gotten behind this idea, but they're a little bit hamstrung by lack of funding, to playing a zero-sum game. So their support for this would have to come right now at the expense of support for other tough decisions to make. So I guess it's the same old thing. These structural changes that begin as a realization by society as a whole and percolate through politics and make their way eventually through the agencies that are responsible for protecting the health of wildlife. Yeah.
The One Health thing is catching on.
Yeah.
But most physicians haven't heard the term. They don't know what it is. And in their day-to-day activities where they're focused on a diagnosis and a treatment, that's a weakness. Because unless they back up to where they're looking at the societal causes of the disease, the failure to regulate a flame retardant that's in your cushions that's maybe giving you thyroid disease,
yep.
The failure to regulate overfishing and contaminants that take wild fish away from people so they don't get omega-3s and protein and carotenoids. Unless they're going to start to slow down and back up beyond that immediate proximate diagnosis and immediate treatment, they're going to continue to fall over the same disease entities time and again and have their patients suffer because of those things time and again. And so they have a responsibility in human medicine to link the practitioners into the public health, into the domestic animal health, into the wildlife health, into the ecosystem health community, so that we can manage things differently, and instead of getting the diagnosis after the fact, we can prevent the whole problem in the first place.
One Health, One Medicine has to become more than a buzzword. It has to become reality.
Well, as far as the definition, of course, the hallmark, the thing that everything rallies around conceptually is that it's going to be a collusion of disciplines. In other words, animal health, human health, and ecosystem health, and finally a recognition that all those things have to work in tandem. You can't treat them as separate. Get away from the Band-Aids and say, let's look at the big picture and what do you have to contribute, what do you have to contribute, and let's develop a holistic answer that really makes sense in the broader context so that we don't get into just a bunch of reactionary, unintended consequences, happening, where we're just empirically striking out and trying to mitigate things that look in the big pictures. Conservation medicine reminds us and instructs us to look at the big picture soberly, rationally, before formulating our opinions and our policies within the confines of individual disciplines. It's just too big for any one person, obviously, but it's too big for any one discipline to really address good solutions without having everybody involved.
We need, for organized veterinary medicine, AVMA, to foster this effective big picture stewardship we've been talking about. Because otherwise, we're the fire engine veterinarians of yesterday. And we need to continue to be the fire engine veterinarians, saving this species and helping with that species so they'll be healthy when they're breeding in captivity until we can get the outdoor environment right. But we need to be the preventive medicine veterinarian through the ecosystem rehab projects and conservation biology projects that we participate in as well. And if we can keep the wildlife healthier, we can keep the people healthier too.
We need to get out more. We need to have a seat at more of a seat at the table, and more tables. The CDC or the World Health Organization, the World Animal Health Organization in Paris, the Environmental Program. In other words, vets need to enlarge their professional footprint in this whole thing going forward. We're the perfect bridge, to bring all the concepts together. We just have not been encouraged to do that.
Room for a person to come into veterinary medicine and say, let's talk about the future. Don't tell me it's impossible. The problem we get into time and again is that people that study this say, well, it's so complicated. First you have to spend all these years learning about why we can't do anything and largely accept our theories of why nothing can happen, and then you can go to work. When what's needed is, how the hell are we going to get this obstacle out of our way? Don't give me that it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's human behavior. Human behavior has changed before, and it can change again.
I think it's important for the for the schools to sort of get as much as possible out on the table and to use as many examples as possible, bringing guest speakers, and to just keep sort of putting in front of the students that this is what's happening to our profession. There are more and more and more opportunities.
Everybody around the table and say, well, this is how we see it from our perspective. And it's a tough problem because the curriculum is already so packed. But I think there needs to be some effort to embody in the curriculum this introduction of other disciplines. Of course, where students from other disciplines will mix together, in a seminar format or discussion format, kind of around the same table, so that open eyes not only to other opinions, but to other disciplines. For example, somebody from animal science says, oh, this is what veterinary medicine is about, or somebody from liberal arts, this is what, from sociology, from socioeconomics. Oh, I thought veterinarians just did this. Now I see that, there's a wider potential here. So it's a challenge, but I think we need to somehow, enlarge our curriculum to be, expand the borders beyond veterinary students, just associated with veterinary students.
Well, one of the things I hope is that promising veterinary students like yourself are going to figure out creative ways to channel their energies into actual jobs. Because there's an enormous amount of desire on the part of veterinary students to contribute to this field. And yet, the supply of jobs is not kept up with the demand. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to fix that, but there needs to be an effort to integrate the skills of this field into veterinary medicine in general in ways that will allow students like you to be able to do this for a career.
One of the things I like to say to students is you're probably here because you have a goal in mind of this is what I want to be. This is what I want to do. And I say, go for it. Go for it. But while you're here, look around, because there are a lot of other things out there to do. And just sort of look around and see what there is, and always think about that.
What are my hopes for the future? Well, I have a lot, and that's because I'm really excited to go into wildlife and ecosystem health upon graduating from veterinary medical school. So mostly what I hope for the future is that more and more people will also become as equally interested in this field as I am, and that veterinary medical schools will continue to provide opportunities for students to pursue those interests, and also for students who don't necessarily have those interests to develop them, because you never know, like Dr. Easterday said, you never know where you're going to end up. Another one of my biggest hopes for the future is that we continue to find ways to fund all of these jobs that we're hoping to create, because we know that it is essential to have veterinarians collaborating with wildlife ecologists, with human physicians, with sociologists, and with